Hey everyone, I'm JJ, your mentor, and I know that you will secretly skip my introduction portion if it's too long. So I'll do you a help, I'll skip myself, and we will move on to what is apoptosis part 2. Tada! That means there was a part 1. So if you haven't watched that, please go and watch because it contains the basics. Trust me, it contains the basics. And now we are getting into a deeper thing, that is there some other process like apoptosis? And I will make you self-capable of answering this particular question. And for that, we need a quick recap of what we have learned previously so that you can easily compare and tell by yourselves that is there a process like apoptosis or not. Apoptosis is a process which leads to cell death or at the end of which a cell dies. Okay, and it is energy dependent, which means it needs energy in the form of what? ATP. Yeah, and it is programmed genetically, that is, it is already incorporated within us in our genes, and it is highly regulated process. That means it just cannot say that oh, I had a personal grudge on that particular cell, I always wanted to kill that cell. No, that doesn't work here. Revenges doesn't work here, or personal grudge doesn't work here. The cell needs signal. Okay, it just cannot kill any random cells. Yeah, and the cell which is undergoing apoptosis, it transforms into small apoptotic bodies. So if it's a big cell, it gets transformed into small apoptotic bodies which contains the cytoplasmic content. So that means there is no leakage of cytoplasm because all the content is stored within the apoptotic bodies. Okay, so as there is no leakage, of course there won't be any cellular matter surrounding the portion where apoptosis is happening. So there is no inflammation because inflammation is a response to something that is not naturally occurring, right? So there is no inflammation and it doesn't cause damage to other cell. Yeah, and we will have a picturized representation of what is apoptosis and how does it work. So this is my large cell or normal cell. It gets shrunken into a small cell, and the chromatin which was within this cell condenses. And what is this particular process known as? So if you have watched my previous video, you should know that. Let me ask you. Let me give you time first. Yeah. Tick tick 1, tick tick 2, tick tick 3. Yes, it is known as pycnosis or karyopycnosis. Okay, so now this shrunken cell, the membranes of this cell starts blebbing and forms compartment, and these compartments are separated as such, and they form apoptotic bodies. So apoptotic bodies contain the cytoplasmic content which was already present inside the cell, and also they also contain the disintegrated organelles. Okay, during apoptosis, the organelles disintegrate, so they contain the disintegrated organelles, and there is no leakage. You can see that there is no leakage, and the content is all stored inside these apoptotic bodies, and further these apoptotic bodies are engulfed by macrophages. So there is no trace, so there is no inflammation. Yeah, so apoptosis is a very neat process, and now you know what is apoptosis, and now you can easily compare that whether there is a process like apoptosis or not. So we'll break the suspense and we will get into that. Yeah. So the question is, are necrosis and apoptosis identical twins? Hey, what is necrosis? I haven't heard about that. You didn't teach me necrosis. So how can I answer that whether necrosis and apoptosis are identical twins or not? So let's break the suspense. I will tell you what is necrosis and you tell me whether it's same or not. Yeah. So necrosis degradative process, which means it causes degradation of that particular cell which is undergoing necrosis and also the other cells, that is surrounding cells. So what happens is that in necrosis, the membrane which was once intact, it gets disrupted. So if the membrane is disrupted, the cytoplasmic content will be out and it might cause damage to other cells and might cause inflammation, which was not in the case of apoptosis. Okay, so now tell me whether necrosis and apoptosis are identical twins or not. Yes, you have the answer. The answer is no. Necrosis and apoptosis are not identical twins. And necrosis is usually caused by some cell injury. That is, it is not predetermined. Okay, It happens because all injuries are not predetermined, right? It happens all of a sudden. So necrosis is a result of a cell injury or when cell are under some stress, which I'll discuss right now. What kind of cell injury or stress? So it could be mechanical injury such as when there is a cut or slit on the body. For example, when you're cutting a tomato or a potato, whatever. Okay, when you're cutting that, if by mistake your fingers get a cut, what happens? Inflammation occurs and redness occurs in that particular portion, right? It occurs because the cytoplasmic content is now leaked and it damages other cells. That's the sole reason of inflammation. Okay, so yeah, mechanical injuries. And the next thing, when there's abnormal temperature, it is a stress. Okay, when there's abnormal temperature change, you know, right, all the enzymes in a body are temperature specific. They work under a particular temperature. Certain enzymes cannot work under certain temperatures. It gets degraded and destroyed. So that's how necrosis occurs inside that cells where abnormal temperature change is seen. Okay, and when there is no adequate amount of oxygen, so it is also a form of stress. When there is no oxygen, cells working is literally blocked, and that's how necrosis occurs. And the last point is when cells are affected by chemicals or toxins and even infections. Might have experienced this, that is when chemicals fall on our skin, we can see there is redness and inflammation caused in on our skin, and that is caused by necrosis. Now we will get into a tabular difference between necrosis and apoptosis, and that looks like this. Yes. So I'll go one by one and we will, yeah, just compare each of its features. Yeah. So apoptosis is programmed wave cell death. I already told it is already incorporated within us in our genes, whereas necrosis is premature way of cell death, which means before the cell attains its maturity or before the cell completes its lifespan, the cell dies, and it is caused due to cell injury, right? It is not predetermined. It is not. It is a premature way of cell death. Okay, and the next thing is that the cell shrinks. So first of all, look at this cell. Now this cell shrinks in apoptosis and gets swell in or gets swollen in necrosis. Okay, so cell swelling happens in necrosis, whereas cell shrinkage occurs in apoptosis. Now pycnosis and karyorrhexis occurs in apoptosis. Okay, JJ, you have told me about pycnosis. Pycnosis is chromatin condensation, but what does karyorrhexis means? So karyorrhexis means nuclear fragmentation. Nuclear fragmentation. So the nucleus, which was once intact, it gets fragmented into small pieces. You can see this here. Okay, similarly you can see it here also. So that's karyorrhexis, nuclear fragmentation. So in apoptosis, pycnosis and karyorrhexis occurs, whereas in necrosis, pycnosis and karyorrhexis occurs, and along with that karyolysis also occurs. What is karyolysis? Karyolysis means the chromatin is dissolved. Okay, the chromatin content is now dissolved. So in necrosis there are three things, whereas in apoptosis there is just two things. Okay, in necrosis there is pycnosis, karyorrhexis, and karyolysis. Karyolysis is dissolution of chromatin content. So you can learn it like pycnosis means the chromatin condenses, and after condensation it gets dissoluted, and then the chromatin was stored inside the nucleus, so the nucleus is fragmented. Okay, so that there are three things. And then the cell membranes remains intact in apoptosis, and that's why it is retained, the cytoplasm is retained within the apoptotic bodies because they are intact still. Okay, the membrane is still intact, and hence there is no inflammation, whereas here the cell membrane is disrupted, so there is no one to hold the cell. Okay, so the cytoplasmic content is now released, and as the cytoplasmic content is released, there is inflammation. So yes, that's it about necrosis and apoptosis. One more thing, that is autophagy. In that process, lysosomes are the main hero. That is, lysosomes are organelles which contains digestive enzymes. Okay, so when there's a particular damage inside a cell, that is, there's a damaged mitochondria, for example, these lysosome releases enzymes which kills these damaged mitochondria. Okay, and that's how the killing work. It is also known as a non-apoptotic way of cell death, but it is still under research, so I'm no one to give a statement about that. So yes, that's it about necrosis and apoptosis. And necrosis was a main thing, so that's why I discussed it here. Yeah, that's it. Now I want you to stop and breathe and revise, because we all need a little bit of pushing when we learn something new. This pushing helps store things in our brain permanently. So yes, I hope it helps. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to this audio, or watching this video. And encourage me if you like this by liking and sharing and subscribing. And have a good day. That's it. Much love. Bye from JJ.